Hi, and this morning we are on page 224 at the very top. Let's see what happens next. As soon as the raft of barrels came in sight, boats rowed out from the piles on the town and voices hailed the raft steerers. Then ropes were cast and oars were pulled, and soon the raft was drawn out of the current of the forest river and towed away round the high shoulder of rock into the little bay of Lake Town. There it was moored not far from the shoreward head of the great bridge. Soon men would come up from the south and take some of the casks away, and others they would fill with goods they had brought to be taken back up the stream to the wood elves' homes. In the meanwhile the barrels were left afloat while the elves of the raft and the boatmen went to feast in Lake Town. They would have been surprised if they could have seen what happened down by the shore after they'd gone and the shades of night had fallen. First of all, the barrel was cut loose by Bilbo and pushed to the shore and opened. Groans came from inside, and out crept a most unhappy dwarf. Wet straw was in his draggled beard. He was so sore and stiff, so bruised and buffeted, he could hardly stand or stumble through the shallow water to lie groaning on the shore. He had a famished and a savage look, like a dog that had been chained and forgotten in a kennel for a week. It was foreign, but you could only have told it by his golden chain, and by the colour of his now dirty and tattered sky-blue hood with its tarnished silver tassel. It was some time before he would even be polite to the Hobbit. "Well, are you alive or are you dead?" asked Bilbo quite crossly. Perhaps he had forgotten that he had had at least one good meal more than the dwarfs, and also the use of his arms and legs, not to speak of a greater allowance of air. "Are you still in prison or are you free? If you want food, and if you want to go on with this silly adventure, it's yours after all, and rub your legs and try and help me get the others out while there is a chance." Thorin, of course, saw the sense of this, so after a few more groans he got up and helped the Hobbit as well as he could. In the darkness, floundering in the cold water, they had a difficult and very nasty job finding which were the right barrels. Knocking outside and calling only discovered about 6 dwarfs that could answer. These were unpacked and helped ashore, where they sat or lay muttering and moaning. They were all soaked and bruised and cramped, that they could hardly yet realise their release, or properly be thankful for it. Dwalin and Balin were two of the most unhappy, and it was no good asking them to help. Bifur and Bofur were less knocked about and drier, but they lay down and would do nothing. Fili and Kili, however, who were young for dwarfs and had also been packed more neatly with plenty of straw into smaller casks, came out more or less smiling, with only a bruise or two and a stiffness that soon wore off. "I hope I never smell the smell of apples again," said Fili. "My tub was full of it. To smell apples everlastingly when you can scarcely move and are cold and sick with hunger is maddening. I could eat anything in the wide world now for hours on end, but not an apple." With the willing help of Fili and Kili, Thorin and Bilbo at last discovered the remainder of the company and got them out. Poor fat Bomber was asleep or senseless. Dori, Nori, Ori, Oin and Gloin were waterlogged and seemed only half alive. They all had to be carried one by one and laid helpless on the shore. "Well, here we are," said Thorin, "and I suppose we ought to thank our stars and Mr. Baggins. I am sure he has a right to expect it, though I wish he could have arranged a more comfortable journey. Still, all very much at your service once more, Mr. Baggins. No doubt we shall feel properly grateful when we are fed and recovered. In the meanwhile, what next?" "I suggest Lake Town," said Bilbo. "What else is there?" Nothing else could, of course, be suggested. So leaving the others, Thorin and Fili and Kili and the Hobbit went along the shore to the great bridge. There were guards at the head of it, but they were not keeping very careful watch, for it was so long since there had been any real need. Except for occasional squabbles about river tolls, they were friends with the wood elves. Other folk were far away, and some of the younger people in the town openly doubted the existence of any dragon in the mountain, and laughed at the greybeards and gammers who said that they had seen him flying in the sky in their young days. That being so, it was not surprising that the guards were drinking and laughing by a fire in their hut, and did not hear the noise of the unpacking of the dwarves or the footsteps of the 4 scouts. Their astonishment was enormous when Thorin Oakenshield stepped in through the door. "Who are you, and what do you want?" they shouted, leaping to their feet and groping for weapons. "Thorin, son of Fran, son of Thor, king under the mountain," said the dwarf in a loud voice, and he looked it in spite of his torn clothes and draggled hood. The gold gleamed on his neck and waist, his eyes were dark and deep. "I have come back. I wish to see the master of your town." Then there was a tremendous excitement. Some of the more foolish ran out of the hut as if they were expected the mountain to go golden in the night, and all the water of the lake turn yellow right away. The captain of the guard came forward. "And who are these?" he asked, pointed to Philly and Killy and Bilbo. "The sons of my father's daughter," answered Forin, "Philly and Killy of the race of Durran, and Mr. Baggins, who has travelled with us out of the west." "If you come in peace, lay down your arms," said the captain. "We have none," said Forin, and it was true enough. Their knives had been taken from them by the wood elves, and the great sword Orcrist too. Bilbo had his short sword hidden as usual, but he said nothing about that. "We have no need of weapons, who return at last to our own as spoken of old, nor could we fight against so many. Take us to your master." "He is at a feast," said the captain. "Then all the more reason for taking us to him," burst in Philly, who was getting impatient at these solemnities. "We are worn and famished after our long road, and we have sick comrades. Now make haste and let us have no more words, or your master may have something to say to you." "Follow me then," said the captain, and with 6 men about them he led them over the bridge, through the gates, and into the marketplace of the town. This was a wide circle of quiet water, surrounded by tall piles on which were built the greater houses, and by long wooden quays with many steps and ladders going down to the surface of the lake. From one great hall shone many lights, and there came the sound of many voices. They passed its doors and stood blinking in the light, looking at long tables filled with folk. "I am Forin, son of Fwan, son of For, king under the mountain." "I return," cried Forin in a loud voice from the door, before the captain could say anything. All leaped to their feet. The master of the town sprang from his great chair, but none rose in greater surprise than the raftsmen of the elves, who were sitting at the lower end of the hall. Pressing forward before the master's table, they cried, "These are prisoners of our king that have escaped, wandering vagabond dwarfs that could not give any good account of themselves, sneaking through the woods and molesting our people." "Is this true?" asked the master. As a matter of fact, he thought it far more likely than the return of the king under the mountain, if any such person had ever existed. "It is true that we were wrongfully waylaid by the Elven king and imprisoned without cause as we journeyed back to our own land," answered Forin. "But lock nor bar may hinder the homecoming spoken of old, nor is this town in the wood elves' realm. I speak to the master of the town of the men of the lake, not to the raftsmen of the king." Then the master hesitated and looked from one to the other. The Elven king was very powerful in those parts, and the master wished for no enmity with him, nor did he think much of old songs, giving his mind to trade and tolls, to cargoes and gold, to which habits he owed his position. Others were of different mind, however, and quickly the matter was settled without him. The news had spread from the doors of the hall like fire through all the town. People were shouting inside the hall and outside it. The quays were thronged with hurrying feet. Some began to sing snatches of old songs concerning the return of the king under the mountain, that it was For's grandson, not For himself, that had come back, did not bother them at all. Others took up the song, and it rolled loud and high over the lake. "The king beneath the mountains, the king of cavern stone, the lord of silver fountains, shall come into his own. His crown shall be upholden, his harp shall be restrung, his hall shall echo golden, to songs of yore resung. The wood shall wave on mountains, and grass beneath the sun. His wealth shall flow in fountains, and the rivers golden run. The stream shall run in gladness, the lake shall shine and burn. All sorrow fell and sadness at the mountain king's return." So they sang, or very like that, only there was a great deal more of it, and there was much shouting as well as the music of harps and of fiddles mixed up with it. Indeed, such excitement had not been known in the town in the memory of the oldest grandfather. The wood elves themselves began to wonder greatly, and even to be afraid. They did not know, of course, how Forin had escaped, and they began to think that their king might have made a serious mistake. As for the master, he saw there was nothing else for it but to obey the general clamour, for the moment at any rate, and pretend to believe that Forin was what he said. So he gave up to him his own great chair, and sat Philly and Killy beside him in places of honour. Even Bilbo was given a seat at the high table, and no explanation of where he came in, no songs had alluded to him even in the obscurest way, was asked in the general bustle. Soon afterwards the other dwarfs were brought into the town amid scenes of astonishing enthusiasm. They were all doctored and fed and housed and pampered in the most delightful and satisfactory fashion. A large house was given up to Foreign and his company. Boats and rowers were put at their service, and crowds sat outside and sang songs all day, all cheered if any dwarf showed so much as his nose. Some of the songs were old ones, but some of them were quite new and spoke confidently of the sudden death of the dragon and of cargoes of rich presents coming down the river to Lake Town. These were inspired largely by the master, and they did not particularly please the dwarfs, but in the meantime they were well contented, and they quickly grew fat and strong again. Indeed, within a week they were quite recovered, fitted out in fine cloth of their proper colours, with beards combed and trimmed and proud-stepped. Foreign looked and walked as if his kingdom was already regained, and Schmorg chopped up into little pieces. Then, as he had said, the dwarf's good feeling towards the little hobbit grew stronger every day. There were no more groans or grumbles. They drank his health, and they patted him on the back, and they made a great fuss of him, which was just as well, for he was not feeling particularly cheerful. He had not forgotten the look of the mountain, nor the thought of the dragon, and he was besides a shocking cold. For 3 days he sneezed and coughed, and he could not go out, and even after that his speeches at banquets were limited to, "Thank you very much." In the meanwhile, the wood elves had gone back up the forest river with their cargoes, and there was great excitement in the king's palace. I have never heard what happened to the chief of the guards and the butler. Nothing, of course, was ever said about keys or barrels while the dwarfs stayed in Lake Town, and Bilbo was careful never to become invisible. Still, I dare say, more was guessed than was known, though doubtless Mr. Baggins remained a bit of a mystery. In any case, the king knew now the dwarf's errand, or thought he did, and he said to himself, "Very well, we'll see. No treasure will come back through Mirkwood without my having something to say in the matter, but I expect they will all come to a bad end, and serve them right." He, at any rate, did not believe in dwarfs fighting and killing dragons like Smorg, and he strongly suspected attempted burglary or something like it, which shows he was a wise elf and wiser than the men of the town, though not quite right, as we shall see in the end. He sent out his spies about the shores of the lake and as far northwards towards the mountains as they would go, and waited. At the end of a fortnight, Foreign began to think of departure. While the enthusiasm still lasted in the town was the time to get help. It would not do to let everything cool down with the delay, so he spoke to the master and his counsellors and said that soon he and his company must go on towards the mountain. Then, for the first time, the master was surprised and a little frightened, and he wondered if Foreign was after all really a descendant of the old kings. He'd never thought that the dwarfs would actually dare to approach Schmorg, but believed they were frauds who would sooner or later be discovered and turned out. He was wrong. Foreign, of course, was really the grandson of the king under the mountain, and there is no knowing what a dwarf will not dare and do for revenge or the recovery of his own. But the master was not sorry at all to let them go. They were expensive to keep, and their arrival had turned things into a long holiday in which business was at a standstill. Let them go and bother Smorg and see how he welcomes them, he thought. Certainly, oh, Foreign Fran's son, For's son, was what he said. You must claim your own. The hour is at hand, spoken of old. What help we can offer shall be yours, and we trust to your gratitude when your kingdom is regained. So one day, although autumn was now getting far on, and winds were cold and leaves were falling fast, 3 large boats left Lake Town laden with rowers, dwarfs, Mr. Baggins, and many provisions. Horses and ponies had been sent round by circuitous paths to meet them at their appointed landing place. The master and his counsellors bade them farewell from the great steps of the town hall that went down to the lake. People sang on the quays and out of windows. The white oars dipped and splashed, and off they went north up the lake on the last stage of their long journey. The only person thoroughly unhappy was Bilbo. And that is the end of chapter 10. So we'll start chapter 11 tomorrow.